Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this TTC board meeting to order. The clerk has confirmed that quorum is present. The clerk will now read the land acknowledgement.
We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit.
Thank you. Commissioners, do any of you wish to declare a conflict of interest in accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, we'll move on. Commissioners, the next item is the approval of meeting minutes of December 8th and January 9th. Can I please have a motion to approve the minutes? Commissioner Holiday, all those in favor? Thank you. I would like to remind you that this is an open meeting. As we go through the agenda today, those of you participating remotely will be required to submit requests to ask questions and to speak on items to the clerk. Each member has 5 minutes for questions and to speak. If you wish to submit a motion on an item, please email your motion to the email address that you have been provided with. You've all been provided with appropriate contact information for technical troubleshooting, and staff also have each of your phone numbers should they need to contact you for technical reasons. I will now commence the review of the order paper. Item number 1, the Chief Executive Officer's Report for January 2023. I will hold this item for a presentation from our CEO, Rick Leary. Item number 2, subway closure and streetcar diversions. I will hold this item for a deputation and for a staff presentation. Item number 3, 65 Cumberland Street. Would any member like to hold this item? Thank you, Commissioner Holiday. Item number 4, industrial space lease. Would any member like to hold this item? Can I have seeing none, can I have a motion to adopt the staff recommendations? Thank you, Commissioner Osborne. All those in favor? So moved. Thank you. Item number 5, procurement authorization. Would any member like to hold this item? No. Can I have a motion to adopt the staff recommendations? Commissioner Holiday, thank you. All those in favor? Carried. Item number 6, procurement authorization. Would anyone like to hold this item? Seeing none, can I have a motion to approve? Commissioner Osborne, thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. So moved. Item number 7 is a governance and safety presentation, and I will hold this item. First item of business is the Chief Executive Officer's report, and with that, I'd like to invite our CEO, Rick Leary, to address the board.
So I'll say welcome to our YouTube viewers again, and today's participants to the board's second meeting of 2023. Welcome, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. To let you know, it's good to be back again after last week's special meeting to discussing the TTC budget. I'd also like to welcome members of the Advisory Committee on Accessible Transit today. ACAT recently elected their new chair and vice chairs. So I'd like to congratulate the new chair, Anita Dressler, as well as both vice chairs, Erica Tanny and Gwyneth Denzel, to their new positions. As you know, ACAT is just instrumental in everything that we do as we move forward to make the system accessible. Commissioners, I'll also say to you today that is a little bittersweet for us here at the TTC. After 33 years of service, right, Scott Haskell is retiring at the end of February. Now, Scott started his career at the TTC as a transit planner, and next month will retire after spending the last 2 years as the Chief Strategy and Customer Officer. And as you can see, we have some pictures of Scott over the years. I want to congratulate and say thank you to Scott for his fantastic career. You can't say more about his dedication, how invaluable he is as an employee to this organization. Scott's been a very passionate advocate, as many of you know, for public transit and in the TTC in general. And he's going to be hard to replace. It's really an invaluable individual team member to the overall team. And I can't tell you how much, I can't overstate how much personally he's meant to me. We do laugh together, Scott, because as we sit at the table, it is nice to have people that look through a different lens. And we've looked at different lenses, obviously, right? But I think we came up with better answers and solutions working together, and you've really helped people here. And I also think it's important that people understand, we're very grateful you're mentoring the number of people that you have mentored over the years and who you leave behind, right? You have a terrific legacy. So enjoy your retirement, my friend, and thank you for being here today. So thank you for that. Great pictures. Commissioners, I want to once again thank you for your support on the operating and capital budgets that were approved on January 9th. The 2023 budgets balance the need to deliver a safe service while really contending to the lower revenues and increased operating costs associated with inflation and the increased service of new transit lines. We're also addressing, I remind everyone, that we're addressing our customers' desires for a safe, compassionate, and clean system while ensuring that the TTC remains accessible. As ridership patterns seem to evolve, the TTC is positioning itself to keep Toronto moving, to be there for those who need us the most. And we are continuing our approach of adjusting service capacity to match demand. This is all due, and again, I want to talk about the TTC and their employees, all due to the thousands of highly skilled, professional, and motivated individuals at the TTC who deliver and maintain our safe, reliable, and punctual service every day. So I really for this city and the GTHA, as we know. Commissioners, today's agenda includes a critical state of good repair report regarding subway closure schedules for this year, as well as upgrades to the schedule for streetcars, which is new this year. The report summarizes the work that we achieved in 2023, including initiatives that were implemented to improve service reliability during closures. While we design closures to minimize customer disruptions, and we do it as much as possible, as you're aware, the 2023 subway closures forecast really supports some critical projects that we're forecasting for the future. The Line 1 North Extension, the Line 2 East Extension projects, as well as our easy access and full weekend closures in 2023. And I think you'll hear from Fort about the scale and complexity of some of these construction projects alone do not allow us to conduct efficiently the amount of work that's necessary with the limited window on the all-night shifts. So thus we do weekend diversions. A little bit of historical note. 45 years ago this month, on January 27th, the Spadina subway line officially opened from St. George to Wilson stations. The Spadina line extended the Young University subway northwest to North York. The line added 10 kilometers of track and 8 new stations, each unique in design to the subway network. Each station features an imaginative work of art, especially created by contemporary Canadian artists. And next month, we also can recognize the fact that the University subway from Union to St. George actually turns 60 years old as well. So there's a lot going on with the history as well as we move forward with building for the future. The TTC extends a good fortune and best wishes to everyone who is celebrating Lunar New Year this Sunday, the 22nd. 2023 is the year of the rabbit. This month, TTC buses and streetcars decorated for Lunar New Year are running along the following routes. We have the 510 Spadina streetcar, the 509 Carlton, the 25 Don Mills, the 39 Finch East, and 102 Markham Road. Starting next month, the TTC recognizes Black History Month. This year's theme is Moving Legacies, celebrating Black innovation and resistance in Ontario, and will showcase artwork featuring Black contributors to Ontario politics, education, infrastructure, and industry. Several buses and streetcars highlighting Black history will be featured on the following routes throughout the month of February as well. We have the 501 Queen, the 505 Dundas, 32 Eglinton West, 35 Jane, 36 Finch West, the 54 Lawrence West, as well as the 102 Markham Road. So we look forward to seeing those, as well as others posters that are displayed on a number of our subway lines throughout the system. Our diversity campaigns also include an internal component, which really engages employees to share their thoughts and experiences. At work sites across the TTC, employees volunteer their time to assemble displays and resources that celebrate the significant cultural dates and events on the calendar throughout the year. Diversity, equity, and inclusion continue to be top priorities for our organization, and I would say for me personally. Now, Commissioners, on a positive note, I want to share with you just one example of how our employees go above and beyond their duties and assist our customers every day. If I could, I'd like to invite Ben Curtin up to join me here at the front of the room. I'd like to introduce him to everyone. Now, Ben is an operations supervisor who's been with the TTC for 6 years. This past Monday, on January 16th, Ben responded to an emergency alarm on board a train at Coxwell Station. He arrived to find a 15-month-old infant choking and in distress. When he arrived on scene, Ben immediately put his experience as a paramedic previously to use and began emergency first aid procedures. His quick work resulted in the object being cleared from the child's airway, and when the Toronto EMS arrived, they confirmed that Ben's actions were life-saving. Just an incredible experience and so heroic. So I just want to let you also know that we will be putting a letter of commendation in Ben's file for the amazing work that he's done. So I thought it was important that we bring him in today and say thank you to him and for the job well done. So thank you. Step up in the middle and we'll get a picture. It's amazing when you think about it. You know, when we had the discussions, he just talks about it was instinctive. He just did it. Right? Started taking the jackets off the child and took the child over. It's just, you know, your heart really, you can feel it when he was talking. So thank you again. Finally, I just want to, again, thank staff for all their hard work in preparing these back-to-back meetings this month and remind everyone that next month's board's meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, February 28th. So, Chair, that concludes the opening remarks. Thank you.
And thank you, and thank you again. It was really wonderful to meet you. I can tell you're not a politician. You were very humble. Didn't want any recognition, but it's well deserved. And thank you. On to item number 2, subway. Oh, sorry.
Questions, so they can move.
Oh, sorry. Do you have any questions? No question? No questions? Anyone to speak? Nobody? Okay. Can I have a motion to receive the CEO's report, please? Commissioner Osborne, all those in favor? Carries, thank you. Okay, now item number 2. Yeah. But I do need help. I'm not saying I don't want help. Subway closure and streetcar diversions. I believe we have a deputant, Mr. Colby Badwar. You have 5 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Morning, thank you. So per this report, an average weekend closure costs $500,000 for the TTC. Part of that is attributable to paid duty police officers to direct traffic at pinch points along the shuttle bus route. Paid duty officers cost $90 an hour. However, per previous reports to the board, only half of TTC's paid duty requests for these traffic control duties can be fulfilled by the TPS paid duty office. My own observations of shuttle bus operations confirm that. There are many instances when shuttle buses have been badly bunched due to traffic congestion at key intersections, with route supervisors visibly pulling their hair out and no police officer available. In other instances, one lone officer is assigned to direct traffic at an extremely dangerous intersection, such as Yonge, Berwick, and Sudan, which is just south of Eglinton, that should have had 2 officers working together. Paid duty officers is an expensive and unreliable solution for the TTC to ensure efficient shuttle bus operations. TTC management already came to this conclusion, which is why highway traffic authorities for TTC special constables were requested and endorsed by TPS. This problem will only get worse as work on ATC for Line 2 increases and closures become more regular. Furthermore, paid duty officers don't address the problem of unplanned service disruptions. Only TTC, SCS can deal with that. And finally, in response to Chair Burnside's suggestion that TPS divisional special constables could be contracted to provide these services and other law enforcement services to the TTC, the Police Services Act prohibits a police service from employing special constables to perform the usual duties of a police officer. Providing primary law enforcement services for a transit system is most definitely a usual duty of a police officer, just one that the Toronto Police Services Board currently doesn't want to pay for. In every other major Canadian city, there is a proactive police presence on the system. Toronto is an anomaly in that they only respond to calls, don't have a dedicated unit. So in the interest of ensuring that TTC customers have reliable shuttle bus services during both planned and unplanned subway closures, and minimizing the costs of those services, I would recommend again that the board endorse these authorities as they had previously done so. Thank you for indulging my addendum to my previous deputation on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No? I do have a couple.
Yep.
Thanks. So you're mentioned about a proactive police presence. So I'm just want to clarify, are you looking for police officers to be on the to be assigned to the TTC, or do you think special constables are?
I think that the Toronto Police Transit Patrol Unit, which the board voted to disband in 2016, should definitely be reinstated. There absolutely should be a proactive police presence on the TTC, because Toronto's the only city in probably all of North America, for any big city, that doesn't have that. There's no proactive presence. There's no dedicated unit. This is your beat. You're always going to be assigned to the subway or the transit system more broadly. We don't have that. Every other city in North America does, so we definitely should, but that should be complementary for the TTC's own staff for all of the reasons which I previously outlined, and there's a lot of history why I think that having those 2 different units is very important. Having
They're working in tandem?
Working in tandem, absolutely. I think that's very important for the reason that Toronto Police, they have their own priorities, so even with a dedicated unit, the previous experience was that TTC could not rely on Toronto Police to do fare enforcement, for example, right? In the grand scheme of things, fare enforcement's a fairly minor sort of issue for Toronto Police Service. They're more concerned with major criminal issues, obviously. They didn't want to do those kinds of duties. That's why the TTC needs their own people with their own sufficient authorities to deal with those problems. And TPS needs to be there to support for the bigger issues, which we all know about based on what happens around the world, right? So,
Makes sense. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. You inspired me to ask a question.
I'm inspirational, right?
You sure are. Thank you for talking to us. Just so I understand a bit better, was it the Toronto Police Services Board that disbanded the Transit Patrol Unit?
Correct. That was a recommendation as part of the Transformational Task Force.
From what you know of other transit systems, what type of role are the police officers doing? Is it because it's a big system? So there's certain things they're going to focus on. Could you
Yep.
tell us in 2023 terms? Like, we don't have to look back at 2016, but what are they focusing on?
So TransLink in Lower Mainland BC, Vancouver area, they have a police force for their entire system that does everything, although they also have they call it a security team to supplement that, but they also do fare enforcement as well, as my understanding, so they're really fare enforcement officers. In Montreal, their police service has a dedicated transit patrol unit as we used to that supplements the STM's own special constables who do the same things that we do and have the same authorities, which I had previously alluded to, that makes them quite effective at dealing with their own problems, but they always have that support there from the Montreal Police. And one very sort of innovative thing that they are doing, they have a new program where they pair a police officer from Montreal Police with a STM special constable and a outreach worker. And those three people work together on the system to do outreach to people that are experiencing homelessness or other issues. That's a new program they've started.
And maybe a little more detailed, do they rove around on the system, or do they stay at places and then respond? Like what is their function through the day?
So Vancouver, obviously, they're a full-service police department. They patrol actively. They respond to calls. They have a K-9 unit. Montreal, I can't speak to too many details about their specific deployment, but they're a proactive unit. It's a transit patrol unit. That's their beat. So they're out there patrolling. They're not just waiting for a call to happen. They're out there. And obviously, I mentioned they have this new partnership unit that's active out there patrolling with the STM and with the social worker.
And do they mostly use subway? Like stay on the subway system? Or
I would say that subway's probably the focus because that's just where the greatest volume of calls for service typically is, at least for the TTC certainly. If you look at the amount of calls that the TTC has for issues on their system, it's almost like, I think 90% subway probably, somewhere. It's quite high. And I would suspect that that number is quite similar for similar systems around the world that are, have different modes, subway, transit, LRT, or bus. The subway system's usually very high ridership and has the largest number of calls.
Okay, and final question, just in terms of how they move about, do they stay on the subway and do what they do, or do they actually get a call, leave, get into a car, drive, and then
Sure. So
back into the subway system?
That's variable, I would say. Some officers are going to be on foot, but the issue is, and this is why the ability to respond in a vehicle is very important. If you are at a subway station on foot, and then there's a call several stations down the line, and you got a train stopped, how do you take the subway to go to that incident, right? Because the trains aren't moving, especially with the TTC doesn't have too many places to switch over. So there's no way for them to ride the subway to that call. They have to have some other means of getting there. So if something happens in close proximity, you could walk potentially or run. Or if you're just proactively patrolling, obviously you do that on foot, but there needs to be officers who have access to vehicles so that they can respond to different places, especially for the TTC not having a large number of officers. They have a lot of ground to cover. Toronto's geographically a huge city, and obviously the TTC serves the outlying suburbs as well.
Yeah, especially out in the suburbs, the stations are far apart. So
Very far apart, yeah.
It'd be a long drive.
Downtown, you could walk between stations. You can't do that out in your ward.
Got it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
No problem. Have I inspired anybody else? Commissioner Mantis? Go ahead, please.
Chair, just a quick question. How many officers do we have per amount of riders in Toronto compared to Montreal and Vancouver?
That's an excellent question, Councillor. I delivered those statistics to the board in 2018. I will be happy to provide an update on that when the next transit enforcement, or special constable services report comes out. I will provide that data to the board in a deputation.
And right now we have what, 8 people per shift
8
for the entire network?
Yeah, 8 is the minimum amount of staffing that management has established. Could be more than that on a daily basis, but that is the minimum number that you will see at any given time across the system. 8 is the minimum number.
And our constables, don't they have the same authority or as peace officers as TPS?
They have the same they have the same criminal code powers of arrest, and they have selected provincial authorities as well. They do not have authority. They do not have full authority under the Highway Traffic Act. The board had previously endorsed select authorities under the Highway Traffic Act, which is what I was addressing last time I spoke, and I suggest that they should have nearly full authorities under the Highway Traffic Act. That's not something they currently have, and that is something that the board could look to have those authorities conferred in agreement with the Toronto Police Service.
So would we need TPS to come into the stations under those authorities, and use TPS resources, or would we be able to use the resources that we have at TTC?
No, the TTC's own officers could be conferred these authorities so that they could be more effective at their jobs. They would have the ability to respond more effectively to emergency situations that are happening on the TTC. So if there's a major incident or there's a subway shutdown, they can respond to the scene a lot faster, whereas right now they could spend an hour driving in traffic because they don't have the ability to respond.
So it's more numbers. We need more constables.
I would say you need more constables, and the budget funds that, but the constables will not be effective unless they have these necessary authorities, in my view. So I would suggest the board direct staff to re-enter this into this agreement. Some of these authorities were already conferred previously, and the TPS supported that. I would suggest that this be explored again. Ask the Toronto Police Services Board confer us these Highway Traffic Act authorities to our officers, which they previously had.
So if they previously had these authorities, why were they taken away?
That's a very good question that you should ask staff. The agreement was in the process of being worked out, and then the board never received an update. So this was something that Vice Chair Heisey was fighting for when he was on the board, and I don't know. We can take it offline if you want. I can give you more information about all the history as to what happened.
That would be great. That'd be great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Councillor.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you, Colby. That was very informative. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Chair.
We do have a staff presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Fort Monaco, TTC's Chief of Operations and Infrastructure, to address the board.
Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Like the chair said, I'm Fort Monaco, the Chief of Operations and Infrastructure. So again, good morning, board members, chair and vice chair. Purpose of the report today is just to provide you a summary of the critically important streetcar and subway infrastructure work, what we accomplished in 22, and our preliminary plan for 23, and a quick forecast of what 24 looks like. Next slide, please. So, why do we do closures? Why is it important that subway closures and streetcar diversions are planned and implemented every year? Well, in short, they basically are essential for us to ensure an effective state of good repair of our assets. This is how we ensure the system is safe and operates efficiently. I will say we know that these closures and diversions pose inconveniences for our customers, and we always do the best we can to mitigate that through service planning and bus replacement. And we always give our customers, or we try to give our customers, plenty of notice about these service changes well in advance. Talk a little bit about the subway. A full weekend closure for us is the equivalent of approximately 5 weeks worth of work, night work, and provides 50 hours on uninterrupted interrupted hours and ability to perform maintenance and construction work, and which is much needed work, considering how constrained our overnight night shift normally is. I'd also like to point out that in 2020 and 2021, we took significant advantage of the reduced ridership to execute 4 10-day closures, to replace some critical work, to remove some asbestos on the North Yonge line, replace some critical switch components at Wilson Yard, and also to accelerate some station finishing work at St. Patrick's and Queen's Park Station. Streetcar work is equally as important, but it presents different challenges and opportunities. The work here is mostly done during regular service, so our work is normally done in service for the most part, because we just can't close entire roads. In the case of larger jobs where we require an overhead power cut or track replacement, we need to divert around these areas. Again, we communicate with our customers, local residents, and businesses, and coordinate this critical work with the city, Metrolinx, and utility partners like Toronto Water, Toronto Hydro, Enbridge, the BIA, and so on. The next few slides illustrate some of the work, and you can see the different variety of jobs that we undertake. Next slide. So on line 1, a total of 20 full weekend closures and 5 single-day closures were completed in 2022. Here's a summary of what was accomplished. Next. 5 full weekend closures between St. Clair and Finch supported the Line 1 signaling upgrade known as automatic train control, or ATC. Because of these closures, we were able to commission Line 1 ATC Phase 5 in September 22, making ATC fully operational from VMC to Finch. Next. There's a few pictures of this. This is work done on the construction side, folks installing cables and snake tray. This was in the past, but very, very proud of this accomplishment given that the construction work was all done by TTC forces. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to highlight 1 full weekend closure was executed between Shepherd and St. Clair for the construction and commencement of the Easier Access project at Lawrence Station, which is slated to be completed in '24. Next slide. So a few pictures of the work that was done to commence this very, very important project. Next slide, please. In addition, we did 1 weekend closures from Shepherd West to Wilson to upgrade the Wilson Yard asset infrastructure resiliency, which is basically the trackside heating equipment out of likely our most critical yard. As you can see, there's our folks doing a significant amount of work installing trough, laying cable, and making the heating elements available for our switch assets. Next slide, please. Next, I'll mention 13 full weekend closures and 4 single-day closures between Lawrence to St. Clair supported the required work required for the ECLRT project at Eglinton Station. Next slide. Again, a few pictures of the work that was done. Some of the work was done in the station as part of the renovation. Some of the work was done in the tunnel, installing cables and what's so forth for the new fire ventilation system. Next slide, please. Finally, 1 single-day closure from Osgood to King was executed in December of '22 to support the state of good repair work at St. Andrews Center Track to perform corrective maintenance on the rail and the switch on the main line. Next slide, please. There's some pictures from our critical work in December. Next slide. So in total, that's our total and the amount of work and where we did it here on line 1. Next slide, please. Talk briefly about line 2. On line 2 in '22, we did a total of 4 weekend closures and 1 single day closure. I'm happy to present you a summary of what we did. Next. 3 full weekend closures from Jane to Ossington were utilized to support a full track turnout replacement at Keel Crossover. Next slide. There's some pictures, and what I'll mention is the track work is hand in hand with their traction power work and hand in hand with our signal work. So there is a lot of conglomeration of different trades coming together to come in, get all the assets done, from the ballast to the ties to the rail to the traction power systems to the signaling equipment. So it's a big package of work when we do an entire crossover. Next slide, please. 1 full weekend closure was utilized from Broadview to Woodbine to complete a full track turnout replacement at Greenwood Yard. A few pictures of that work. On the left is the before, on the right is the after. All new assets, fresh ballast, fresh rail ties, rail, along with power rail and coverboard. Next slide, please. Lastly, on line 2, 1 single day closure from Kennedy to Warden was utilized to support the expansion project for the Scarborough Subway Extension Metrolinx project. Next, I'll move on to the 2022 accomplishments on the streetcar side. In '22, TTC supported 12 capital projects, 26 full weekend closures, and 89 nights of diversions. Next. Big work I'd like to point out at this point are all the capital projects. The capital projects are the formerly mentioned big pieces of work that are coordinated with the City of Toronto, Construction Services, the BIAs, the CAFE TOs, Toronto Hydro, Enbridge, and TTC Service Planning and Closure and Diversion teams. These diversions are to support major capital work in conglomeration with our city partners, and they are meant to be diverted for a minimum of 1 board period. And for those who don't know, a board period is defined as 6 weeks. Next slide. You'll see some of the critical work that was done. This is all surrounding the King, Queensway, Queen, and Roncesvalles work. Next slide, please. Some of the key work that we do is also called what we call car stop replacement, which is basically work, predictive maintenance to replace rail at the car stops, where the rail does tend to degrade a lot faster at these stops. as a result of the rail-to-wheel friction interface that's involved in the continuous braking at these locations. Next slide, please. Show a few pictures of some of the work that we did on these car stops. As you can see, it's a complete and total demolition of the civil. There's a lot of civil work that's involved in it, the breaking of the concrete, the replacement of the rail, and the pouring of the slab. Next slide, please. So quickly, we'll go through this, and basically there was 17 weekend diversions in 2022 to conduct critical maintenance work in each of our 3 streetcar tunnels. I'll quickly walk through this. So Chrisanne, you can just basically, I'll walk through the pictures if you like. So there's the work in the harborfront inspections. Again, we have 3 tunnels that we service. The one at the Union, there's one at Spadina, and there's obviously St. Clair West. And we do everything from lighting repairs to leak remediation to vacuuming, storm drainage pits, a lot of preventative maintenance work on our catenary system, as well as cleanup of sand and pandrel clip replacements. Next slide, please. There's some of the other work that we did on the infrastructure state of good repair. Next slide, please. Additional work showing the lighting repairs done in the tunnels. A lot of door testing done to make sure our doors are in a state of good repair and safe to operate. Next slide, please. Additional locations where we did preventative maintenance work. Next slide, please. A lot of our work involves intersection work that's basically on our own because the rail is past state of good repair, past asset life cycle. So we do a lot of work, and as you can see, there's the before and there's the after. Removal of the concrete, repair of the margins, new rail, tie replacement, and new concrete. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Big project we did was cable replacement on Harborfront to ensure that our state of good repair on our electrical traction power system is in good shape. Next slide, please. So as you can see, we had a very busy year in streetcar land. As you can see, pretty much all the major routes were impacted in some way or form to make sure that the system was operating optimally. Next slide, please. Do a quick outlook of what 23 looks like. Back to the subway. So in 2023, we are planning 15 full weekend closures, 1 single day closure, and 29 days of station bypass. Next slide. So what are we doing? For ATC, we got 2 full weekend closures and 1 single day closure being planned from St. Clair to Shepherd to implement an updated software package to ensure all previous phases of software defects and deficiencies are addressed on the existing system that we freshly commissioned. Next slide, please. We're doing 11 full weekend closures between easier access and station finishing projects, as Rick had earlier mentioned. We're doing 3 from Shepherd to St. Clair and the remaining from St. George to St. Andrew. Next slide, please. We have a full weekend closure planned from St. Clair West to Shepherd West for critical state of good repair track repair work at Wilson Yard. Next slide, please. And 29 nights of single platform operation at Finch Station. 1 platform basically will be taken out of service nightly from 11 p.m. onwards to the end of service in 2-week blocks, 1 block per round. Next slide, we'll take a look at what line 2 looks like in 23. So we're planning a total of 9 full weekend closures. Next slide. We're dedicating 3 full weekend closures from Victoria Park to Kennedy for the early enabling work on the ATC line 2, which is good news for a lot of people. Next slide, please. We have 2 full weekend closures being planned for testing and commissioning of a new signaling system and additional track installation work at Kipling Station. Next slide. A full weekend closure planned from Broadview to Woodbine for critical track work at Greenwood Yard. Next slide, please. And we have 3 full weekend closures from Warden Kennedy, so we can continue work on the Scarborough subway extension, Kennedy eastwards. Next slide. A quick look at what 23 looks at a very, very, very high preliminary level on the streetcar side. So in 23, we are planning or aiming for 10 capital projects. Again, capital projects are those that last more than 6 weeks, 29 full closures, and 134 nightly diversions. Next slide, please. We have 10 total capital projects targeted, and again, our capital projects are planned in conjunction with the city and various other partners. Next slide. We're looking at 8 total weekend diversions for car stop work, and the rest are 21 full weekend closures planned for critical maintenance in our tunnels and intersections as we had previously outlined. Just a few clicks of the slide, I think 3 clicks, Chrisanne. As you can see, it is going to be another busy year. Pretty much every line is going to have some impact of some sort, so we look forward to the challenge. Next, I'll do a quick preliminary outlook of what 24 looks like from a closure and diversion standpoint. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're looking ahead to 24 for additional projects and continued work on some of what I've outlined today. I will say this is very preliminary. There's still a lot of efficiencies there's a lot of groups that need to come together, but as you can see, this is what we're planning preliminarily. We're sure we can drop them, but we're not 100% sure yet. There's a lot going on, particularly in streetcar world, as I previously mentioned. So hopefully that concludes my presentation. Hopefully that gives everyone a bit of an outlook of what we did. I'm happy to take questions, but before I do that, I'd like to do a little show and tell if people are happy to see it. I did bring some props. I'll start with our 150-pound rail. This is what we use in the streetcar, but we also use a similar type of rail in the subway. What I'd like to show you is, this is a brand new rail. This is what the cross-section of the rail looks like. Oops, thanks, Stuart. This is a piece of rail that we just took out of King West. So as you can see, there's a significant amount of deterioration on the head of the rail. You can also see here on the side here, just above the web, you can see there's a considerable thinness to the rail. The color is a little different. It's a little bit of oxidation, but the concern, particularly in the streetcar world, is the fact that because we're encased in concrete, the head gets significant amount of wear to it. So it becomes very, very critical. When we need to come in and replace the rail, as you can see, it is an absolute requirement to do so. On the subway side, it's a slightly different environment. Not a lot of our rail is encased in concrete, so we have other challenges. In the subway, you will at times see a lot of corrosion on the base of the rail, and that corrosion will eat away at the steel, which will weaken. Oh, okay.
Together so they can see the difference.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if that'll help. But I guess the bottom line here is that in the subway you could have significant amount of corrosion on the base, but you'll also have susceptibility on the web as well. It's a completely different system. It's a ballasted track, so it has a lot more flexibility, and that's where a lot of drainage issues will cause the ballast and subballast and the subgrade to actually weaken. So that's on the rail side. I also brought a prop to show the. Yeah, sure. Okay. So here's our traction power cable. This is what a new traction power cable is supposed to look like. This is 1,000 MCM, and this is basically responsible for carrying up to 4,000 amps of current to our streetcars and our subways. Here's a piece we recently removed out of Harborfront, I believe. So as you can see, this is significant deterioration in the insulation, which actually impacts the electrical properties of the cable. So not only does that not make our system unreliable, it makes it rather unsafe. An arc flash at 600 volts and in excess of 3,000 amps is very, very, very dangerous for anyone that's doing the work. A lot of this stuff is buried, so it becomes a real challenge because if you know your cable's faulted, you can't really tell exactly where it's faulted. You need to trace it. We also have some of this feeder that goes above ground, and the beauty of that is you can actually see it, but it's actually a lot more susceptible to the environment. So this is our cover board for our third rail traction power system. This piece actually looks a lot better than it actually is. It's actually stapled together. So when I pass it around, you'll actually see the staples here. I can quickly break this. So as you saw at the Greenwood slide, we are in the midst of replacing all our wood with fiberglass. And so the beauty of the fiberglass is it's not susceptible to the environment. It doesn't weaken from an excessive amount of moisture. It doesn't weaken from the UV. A lot of things I've always said is take a look at your condition of your cover board. That'll give you a good indication of what your rail is. So anytime you'll see this, you can be pretty certain that it's new rail. So if you go in some of our yards and you see some of this older stuff, it's likely that the rail is due for replacement. So what we try to do is we try to do an entire package of work where we do the rail, we do the traction power system, and with that, we do the coverboard. So if you're a non-track person, just a quick thing is just take a look at the coverboards. The coverboard's in bad shape, the rail needs to be replaced. And lastly, this might be a little bit harder to see, but thank God that Natalie's passing it around. This is a new piece of 4/0 trolley wire. This is used on our overhead system. And what you'll see here, as I pass these around, you'll see some excessive wear. So two things. If the wire thins, it becomes mechanically weakened and the overhead comes down. Overhead coming down is not a good thing, as you guys can tell. Not only does it disrupt service, but it becomes a major safety issue for anybody and everyone in that vicinity. So the other thing is along with that is it honestly does not, you can have a lot of issues in terms of delivering power because, you know, you've got a safety concern here. So this one here has got the wear, but if you guys can, I'll pass these two around, I think, Natalie, because this one is probably a little bit more. Okay, I could have brought more, but I didn't have the the cargo van with me today. So hopefully that gives everyone a quick overview of what the closures are all about and why we do what we do. And hopefully the props were helpful. But I'm happy to take any questions anyone may have.
Thank you for it. That was extremely interesting, yeah. Julie? Commissioner Osborne?
I have a quick question. Just curious how the volume of closures this upcoming cycle this year compares to last year.
Okay, so all in all, Commissioner, it's all in all, if you put them together, they're about the same. We've had a slight decrease on the subway side and a slight uptick on the streetcar side. But streetcar side, I will tell you, what we plan for isn't always what plays out because there's so many different parties involved. But just if we look at strictly the numbers, what we asked for last year versus what we're asking for this year, all in all about the same, slight downwards on the subway, a slight uptick on the streetcar.
Thank you, Commissioner Holliday.
Thank you for the presentation. You did mention a staggering statistic. A full weekend closure is equivalent to approximately 5 regular weeks of night work. I had to double check because I didn't know if you said nights or weeks. And I just wondered if you could explain that to us. Because I would imagine, well, I know, you know, that's a tension point with the public, right? When there's a full closure.
Yep.
So why are you able to get that much work out of it?
So what really happens is that although the system is shut down, say 3 hours a night, the amount of time we actually get to do the work varies between an hour and 50 minutes, an hour and 30 minutes. And why is the reason? So the difference is, first and foremost, we need to get out of the yard, which means we get to load our work cars, and then as the last revenue service train comes in, our work cars go out. We have to get to the site. We have to set up the work site, which means we have to put the necessary protection in place. If we execute that well and there's no need for power isolation, you're looking at about an hour and 50 minutes worth of work. Because then you got to remember, we have to clear that site, we have to tear down the site, we have to make our way back to the yard so that the revenue trains could run. If we need a traction power isolation, a power cut or an isolation, that average drops to about an hour and a half. So if you really take a look at it, if we're not slick, if that hour is just an hour and a half starts becoming an hour, you're almost not even worth doing the work. If we got to do a thermite weld on a piece of rail, we need a power cut, we generally need about an hour and a half minimum to make sure that that rail is done properly. If not, that weld will fail and we'll be coming back to it. So the beauty of a closure, what it does, you do one setup at the beginning and one setup at the end. I don't need to go back and forth to the yard. I've got everybody there and everyone shows up on the site.
Okay, are there other economies of scale or are there other additional costs that weigh into it? So I guess, you know, the substitute service that we have to provide, the profile would be different. Does that have a major impact on your decision to do a weekend closure?
Yeah, I think it would, yep.
Is there a premium to nighttime work versus daytime? In other words, can you get more done in the daytime versus night, or does it matter?
No, I think it really doesn't matter, to be honest with you. I mean, when we execute the closure, we get those 50 hours, we hit it, right? On days, obviously, with service running, particularly in the subway, there's not really a heck of a lot you can do. So on days we're really doing a lot of the inspection stuff with service running, you really can't take any heavy tools out or anything like that. You can do some maintenance work, but it's nothing heavy. The nighttime, you really don't need streetcars running because a lot of our heavy work requires the use of the engineered cars or the work cars. They need to get out there. There's no way you're going to have an engineered car and a revenue car out there. But once we're in the closure, Commissioner, whether it's a night shift or a day shift, it doesn't matter. It's 50 hours and it's all guns a-blazing.
Okay, and I guess my last question is just about the process. One of the recommendations is to forward it to the Transportation Services Department. And I know at the city, they really do make an effort to look at the big picture.
Yes.
About everything from events going on in the city to other work to the work that we're doing at the TTC. Did you do that process before you brought us the report, or is it the other way, or is it iterative? And I just wanted to understand that relationship with the city and how subject to change this is. In other words, does it continue to get optimized?
So all of the above.
Okay.
So we've done a lot of conversations with the city. We've had a lot of meetings with Transportation Services. I will tell you, Commissioner, it is very fluid. There is a lot going on in the city, and that's already, between our ECS and our transportation people, because we appreciate what transportation has to do. They got to keep the city moving. If you leave it to the infrastructure guys, because they got to get the work done, they'll shut down the entire city. So it's very iterative as well, because you got to keep that completely and totally in mind. And then we've got the pressure of the Metrolinx wanting to get their work in place, right? So I will tell you, this will continue to change throughout. And then we haven't even had the city events formally announced yet.
Thank you for it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Holliday. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, would anyone like to speak? Commissioner Osborne.
Yeah, it's, thank you, that was very thorough, and I know that we do this because we have to. It's clearly an issue for the public, because they get either slightly inconvenienced or significantly inconvenienced when they can't access their services. So that I know that these closures aren't taken lightly, and I am a huge supporter of keeping on top of, as much as we can, these state of good repair projects. The one thing that I would urge us to do is be mindful that the public often doesn't know what's going on when they see these closures. And I had, for example, somebody who said, "Oh, I don't want to ride the subway. It's always broken down." And it was because there were buses lined up at the St. Clair station because of an ATC repair. Well, if we had signs on the street, she didn't need to take the subway. She was just walking by. She thinks the thing's always broken down because we aren't saying what we're doing. So I would just encourage us, in particular for these large-scale closures, to have information out so that people understand that this is a good thing. It may be some short-term pain, but there is some significant long-term gain, because I firmly believe that to be the case. And I would suggest that it be more than just typical digital channels, that we need to make sure that casual passersby understand what is happening here.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Seeing no further speakers, can I have a motion to adopt the report recommendations? Commissioner Holliday, all those in favor? Thank you, that carries. Item number 3, the 65 Cumberland Street, the new entrance connection. I believe we start with questions. Commissioner Holliday, I believe you held this item. Did you have questions?
Thank you, Chair. I was just asking if I could see those rails again, because I think they're a telling example. But just on the Cumberland project, I wondered, do we have rights or a say about how the presence of the entrance to the station is advertised on the street? Like, do we have the ability to put up a sign, to light the entrance in the way that we would like to do to market ourselves now and in the future as a station?
Through the chair, yes. Through the entrance agreement, we do specify that sort of thing, and it is quite common for a third-party entrance like that to have the proper and full TTC entrance signage.
we do something even to push the envelope in the future, like put bright lights or something that really stands us out from the backdrop of the building. It's something I don't think, just frankly, it's something I don't find that we do well enough, is demark our stations in a celebratory way or a marketing way.
Through the chair, we're always looking at improving the wayfinding and the image of our stations, so we'll take that away. Thank you.
Okay, and the second question would be if I recall, the width of the entrance is reducing. So there's steps that you get off the Bay Street bus, you go through the doors, you descend down a set of steps, and it's at a certain width today. That width may be changing in the plans. I recall 2-point-something meters. Are we satisfied with that width, that it will absorb the congestion of people going through there, or do we have standards?
Just through the chair on this one, yes, we do. We have standards that the developer has got to work to. We have an entrance connection policy and standards that they have to comply with, which dictates that the passenger flow through that area.
So we're satisfied that the passenger experience as they descend down will be just as good as it was before, or at least within standards?
Yes, through the chair, yes.
I think my final question is, once a passenger has descended to the lowest level through the building and passes under Bay Street, is the remainder of the passageway barrier-free right to the station?
Through the chair, yes. Just lately, we put accessible elevators from the concourse down to the platform level. That was part of our easier access programme. So at present, you have access from the street level to the platform level.
So the platform level is the same level as the tunnel under the street. Is that correct?
Yes. The platform level is basically it's where the trains come in effectively, yeah. So at present, you can actually go from the street to the concourse level, which is the intermediate level, and then there's elevators there that take you from the concourse level down to the platform level to allow people to embark on the trains.
Okay. And I had one more. Do I read the drawings right that the distance from the street to the elevator that descends, the new proposal shortens that distance?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. It goes from something like 350 metres down to 100 metres.
I see. So this would represent an improvement for accessibility in that the travel
through
distance...
Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, we can move on to speakers. Would anyone like to speak? No? Okay, then can I have a motion to adopt the report recommendations? Commissioner Osborne, thank you. All those in favor? Thank you, that carries. I believe we're on to item number 7. Today we'll receive a presentation from Michael Atlas, General Counsellor, and Betty Hazarjian, Chief Safety Officer, summarizing our legal and safety obligations at the TTC. Michael?
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Michael Atlas, General Counsel for TTC, and with me is Betty Hazarjian, TTC Chief Safety Officer. I do apologize at the beginning as I did not bring any props. We'll be providing you with a brief presentation today on governance, due diligence, and safety. I will be discussing the governance and due diligence portion, and Betty will be discussing the safety, health, and environment systems that exist at the TTC. This is a presentation that we do at the beginning of every term of office for commissioners, and we also do it to any new board member who's onboarded during the term. It's designed to highlight key responsibilities of board members and to also provide some resource information. My part of the presentation will touch on the following areas: fiduciary duty, business judgment rule and decision-making, general responsibilities, code of conduct, and key legislation, which includes director or potential director liability. Next slide. As a general overview of the law, board members have a duty to act honestly and in good faith with a view to the best interests of the organization, and in this case, the TTC. The expected standard for a board member is to exercise care, diligence, and skill that a reasonably prudent person would exercise in comparable circumstances. Next slide. In the case of the TTC, it is an entity created and continued under legislation, which is namely the City of Toronto Act. The TTC is charged with the responsibility of establishing, operating, and maintaining a transportation system to serve all of the inhabitants of the City of Toronto. Two key points we want to highlight. Members of the TTC board are appointed by City Council and not by elected constituents and unlike the city, it does not operate as a form of representative government. Board members are to act in the best interests of the company, in this case the TTC, and not simply take instructions from their nominator. Next slide. So the second topic we want to discuss is the decision-making process. In terms of decision-making process at the board level, courts generally defer and don't interfere with the decisions of a board. There's a recognition at the court level that decisions are often made under pressure and where circumstances may not always allow for a perfect decision. They try not to use hindsight. But from a legal perspective, the focus of the courts in the decision-making process is whether there was a reasonable process, whether there's a procedure and due diligence exercise that led to the decision as opposed to the outcome of the decision. The one caveat I will make is, as a public body, some decisions may be subject to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In those circumstances, the courts may look at the actual decision to determine whether it's contrary to the Charter as opposed to the decision-making process. Next slide. From a governance standpoint, directors are typically involved with the following types of matters: strategic planning, risk management, oversight of management, setting the organization's strategic values and policies, ensuring obligations to stakeholders are understood and achieved, and involvement in significant or major corporate decisions. It is about the overall management of the organization as opposed to the day-to-day management of the organization, and I'll touch upon this again later in a few slides. Next slide. So the third topic is Code of Conduct. The City of Toronto, through Council, has established and adopted a clear set of expectations through two codes of conduct, one regarding the conduct of members of Council, the other regarding the conduct of members of a local board. As the TTC is considered a local board, we will focus on the Code of Conduct for members of a local board. In the presentation, I've embedded a link to the code, and as set out in the Code of Conduct, for Council members, as set out in the codes, both codes actually apply. For non-council members, it is only the code for members of a local board. The code touches upon many areas, including conduct, gifts and benefits, use of board property, services and other resources, conflict of interest, business relations and outside activities. The code contains both rules and commentary on those rules. Next slide. Any questions or concerns relating to the codes should be addressed through the City's Integrity Commission's office, and details with respect to contact information are included in the presentation. I've also highlighted the general mandate of the Integrity Commissioner, as they are responsible for providing both the advice and education relating to the codes, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and other bylaws, policies, and legislation governing ethical behavior. The Integrity Commissioner is also responsible to conduct any investigations with allegations of any wrongdoing with respect to violations of the code. Next slide. I just want to take a few minutes to highlight one key area under the code for members of local board as it relates to confidential information. The code contains a definition which provides that confidential information means information in the possession of or received in confidence by the TTC that the TTC is prohibited from disclosing or using for a purpose other than the purpose it was received, required to refuse to disclose under the Municipal Freedom of Information Act, restricted from using or disclosing under the Criminal Code or Securities Act, or is restricted from using or disclosing due to some contractual obligation that the TTC or the city has. Next slide. The code then sets out what a member is restricted from doing with the confidential information and provides 4 general restrictions. Number 1, can't disclose to any unauthorized person unless required by law or authorized to do so. Number 2, can't use the confidential information for personal or private gain or for the gain of relatives of any person or corporation. Next slide. Number 3, disclose the contents of any matter that has been properly discussed by the TTC in a closed-door meeting until that information is properly released publicly. And finally, access or attempt to gain access to confidential information in the custody of the city unless it's necessary in the performance of their duties. Next slide. So the final area I want to touch on in this presentation, just key legislation that has potential for director liability that we should always be paying attention to. So in Ontario, we have the Occupational Health and Safety Act with a stated purpose of protecting workers from health and safety hazards while performing their job duties and responsibilities. TTC, as the owner, is responsible to ensure that the workplace facilities are constructed, altered, reconstructed, provided, and maintained in accordance with the Ontario Health and Safety Act and its regulations. Next slide. Under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, or OSHA as it's referred to, there's potential liability for both officers and directors of the TTC. Officers and directors are required to take reasonable care to ensure the corporation complies with the Act and the regs, any order and requirement of an inspector or Ministry of Labor director, and any order of the minister. The general duty provisions of OSHA provide that an employer shall take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of a worker. And I will just highlight that this month there has been charges, just to show that this exists in real life. There were charges laid against the corporation and its president, both as an officer and a director, relating to an incident that occurred in January of 2022, where 6 workers were killed in Ottawa in an explosion at a manufacturing facility. Next slide. OSHA also expressly addresses the responsibility of workplace parties with respect to workplace harassment, workplace sexual harassment and violence, and requires prevention, mitigation, and investigations as part of the obligations. Next slide. So I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but from a due diligence perspective, and due diligence is a defense under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, directors are not responsible for the day-to-day management of the organization. However, directors must be satisfied that there are proper systems in place and functioning as they should, and that individuals are adequately and properly trained to do their job safely, and that there is a reporting system in place that people at appropriate levels are informed of safety-related issues if and when they arise. This presentation, which is done, as I mentioned earlier, at the beginning of every term of office and to any new commissioners being onboarded, is part of a larger due diligence program at the TTC. Through the Audit and Risk Management Committee, we have recently developed an executive compliance program in which is designed to provide assurance to the Audit Committee and the Board that there are policies, procedures, and processes in place to report any non-compliance issues and to properly address any issues to ensure compliance. We expect the 2022 compliance report to be issued either at the next audit report or in the beginning of Q2. Later in this presentation, you'll also hear Betty discuss the TTC Safety, Health, and Environment Management System, which is part of the systems that we have to ensure that we do comply and meet our obligations and to provide some assurance to the board. Next slide. So under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, I've provided the maximum fine amounts that are available. So for corporations, you'll see it's $1.5 million. For directors and officers, the maximum fine is $1.5 million as well. And for individuals, it's $500,000. What is significant here is that you'll see that in July of last year, that the province amended the potential liability and increased it from $100,000 to $1.5 million, representing a 15 times increase. And if you go back to December of 2017, it was increased from 25,000 to 100,000. So in less than 5 years, you have seen an increase of maximum fine directors and officers increasing from 25,000 to 1.5. And I think that just highlights how successive governments are emphasizing the obligation of directors and officers to ensure a safe workplace. Next slide. So there's also legal liability for directors under the Criminal Code. These are changes made to the Criminal Code in 2004 that arose from the West Train Mines incident that occurred in 1992, in which 26 workers died after a methane explosion. And there was no real ability to be able to charge or convict any officer or director with respect to that incident. So the federal government made amendments in 2004 to try to address this issue. It created a clear legal duty of care, which applies to everyone with authority to direct work, and that includes directors. Obligation is to take reasonable steps to prevent harm to workers and to the public. Next slide. Under the criminal code, there's potential criminal negligence. The criminal code defines criminal negligence as doing or omitting to do anything that is their legal duty to do so and shows wanton or reckless disregard for the lives or safety of others. Wanton and reckless disregard has been defined to mean a marked and substantial departure from what a reasonable person could do in the same circumstances. And again, I just highlight section 217.1, which is the provision that was added in 2004 by the government to create a clear legal duty of care for anyone. Next slide. With respect to penalties, individuals, including officers and directors, are at risk of imprisonment. There are fines of up to $100,000 for summary convictions and no limit on convictions for indictable offense. And just one recent example, or one high-profile example, if many of you remember, there was a tragic Christmas Eve incident in 2009 involving collapsing of scaffolding. That corporation was fined originally $200,000 and increased to $750,000. And the project manager was convicted under the criminal negligence provisions and sentenced to 3.5 years in jail. Next slide. So this is the last slide of my presentation, but provides a nice link to Betty's portion of the presentation, which will talk about the safety, health, and environment management systems. But in addition to OSHA and the criminal code, the Environmental Protection Act also includes duties and obligations of directors and officers. You must exercise reasonable care to prevent a company from causing or permitting the discharge of contaminants into the natural environment, and an obligation to report any discharge of contaminants. These are not individual directors' responsibilities, they are management responsibilities, but directors need to ensure that there are systems in place designed to ensure these responsibilities are met. And I'm happy to say that for any incidents that's arisen out of the Environmental Protection Act, the TTC does have systems to report in accordance with the Act. I will now turn over the second part of the presentation to Betty. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael, and good morning, everyone. Good morning, commissioners. So I'm here to elaborate on that segment of your responsibilities related to safety, health, and environment. It is a subset of your overall fiduciary responsibilities, but ones that are particularly defined in legislation as outlined by Michael earlier. Next slide. So my main message to you today is how you are discharging your duties through our formal safety, health, and environment management system. At the TTC, we manage and mitigate safety, health, and environment risks in a systematic and consistent manner through our safety, health, and environment management system. This system is based on global management system standards, which you might have heard about, such as ISO 45001, ISO 14001, and conforms to those standards for identifying, assessing, and controlling safety, health, and environmental risks. It also meets the requirements of the Occupational Health and Safety Act and its regulations. And of course, it provides TTC board members with assurance of their prescribed duties to take all reasonable care to ensure compliance with safety, environmental legislation, and all regulatory orders. Next slide, please. The Safety, Health, and Environment Management System is governed through TTC's Internal Safety, Security, and Environment SX Executive Committee. This committee is chaired by our CEO, and it's staffed by the entire executive team, including other senior staff, and provides executive oversight, direction, and resources. The SX committee reviews key performance indicators on a monthly basis. A few of these are also included in the monthly CEO report, which is provided to the board, and performs a comprehensive safety, health, and environment management system review on an annual basis. The purpose of the annual review is to evaluate that suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of our management system and ensuring the ongoing management of safety, health, and environmental risks. And I'll speak on that annual review process on a later slide. Next slide, please. As with most management systems, the Safety, Health, and Environment Management System is based on a plan, do, check, act model. This is a framework for a proper management system, and it goes beyond a simple sum of individual or isolated programs and activities. It's really designed to improve performance and reduce risks by integrating all processes into a continuous improvement cycle. I'll take you through the elements at a high level, but of course there's a tremendous amount of detail underneath this. Next slide, please. So for planning, it all starts with the Safety, Health, and Environment Policy Statement.
which is that overarching statement. It's a key driver of our safety, health, and environment management at TTC. It demonstrates the senior executive's commitment to protect the environment and the safety and health of its workers, customers, and the general public. It sets out that we will have the safety, health, and environment management system and includes the high-level responsibilities from management down to the worker level. This policy is a requirement under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and it is reviewed annually and signed off by the CEO and posted widely throughout TTC workplaces on all safety notice boards. We have a corporate safety, health, and environment goals and objectives also formally established through our annual review process, and they act as our strategic plan to manage our safety, health, and environmental risks. Next slide, please. Moving on to the do element, we have various safety, health, and environment programs to manage and control our safety, health, and environmental risks. New programs or updates to programs are made based on changes to legislation or for emerging issues. In the development of these programs, because they have very specific responsibilities for various groups across the TTC, we ensure extensive internal stakeholder consultation before these programs come to our Safety Executive Committee for final approval. And of course, we provide support for implementation of these programs as well. Next slide, please. The third aspect is checking. So I'll first talk about external audits. One of the key external audit controls we have is audits through the American Public Transit Association, APTA. So majority of North American agencies belong to APTA, including TTC. APTA is a standard-setting organization. They are also an education and networking group. They're good at helping us to benchmark our performance and keeping up with best practices throughout North America and globally. They have as part of their mandate an audit program which involves both professional auditors and peers from throughout the industry. Typically, they come by every 3 years and do an audit against our management system. Turning to internal audits, these can range from local level supervisor audits, Joint Health and Safety Committee workplace inspections, to the Safety and Environment Department audits, which I'll speak to in a moment, safety assurance check and program audits. So the Safety and Environment Department, we have a set of around 60 safety assurance checks, which are conducted at various frequencies, and they provide management assurance that procedures are being consistently followed on safety critical tasks. We do an average of about 130 of these in a given year and provide departments a quantitative scorecard. Monthly KPI reports are then provided to our Safety Executive Committee, and for any reports identifying low conformance, a detailed action plan is prepared by management to address any of the identified non-conformances. Turning to program audits, so once a program is implemented, safety will come in and do an audit to ensure that not only it's been implemented as per the program document, but that it's effective or whether adjustments need to be made, and of course this drives the whole continuous improvement element. The CEO report, as I mentioned earlier, includes monitoring of KPIs. And of course, the last point here is that the board is advised of all incidents that meet the criteria outlined in the escalation and notification protocol. This protocol was approved by the board in July 2021 and requires that the board be advised of all incidents that meet the following criteria. 1, any level 3 investigation. Level 3 investigations are conducted for our most serious incidents under the supervision of senior management and review and approval by the executive. For occupational incidents, these investigations will address incidents where the amount and the type of hazardous energy involved would most likely result in a fatality. For customer or public-related incidents, the consequence would be multiple fatalities. The second criteria is where there's any near miss of revenue trains on our main line. And third criteria is any safety investigation where we're involving a third-party review. And of course, the fourth one, any matter at the discretion of the CEO or the Chief Safety Officer. Next slide. So moving on to the ACT aspect, as I mentioned earlier, on an annual basis, we conduct a review of TTC's safety, health, and environment management system. The purpose of that review is to ensure that it's continuing to be suitable, it's adequate, and it's effective. The review identifies opportunities for continuous improvement and evaluates how well the management system is functioning. It assesses TTC's safety, health, and environment performance and includes the following inputs. So we take a look at performance indicators, the status of our safety, health, and environment projects and initiatives. We take a look at audits and investigation findings, and of course, regulatory oversight. A report will be prepared for review by the Safety Executive Committee in Q1 of 2023 and is forecast for consideration by the board's Audit Risk Management Committee in Q2 2023. The report will then be forwarded to the TTC board for information. This concludes our presentation. If you have any questions for either myself or Michael, we'd be happy to take them now.
Thank you, Commissioner Holliday, with questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Do I understand correctly that the interface points between the SHE system, and I guess by extension, the SSEE, is two things on slide 25. The CEO's report, released monthly with key performance indicators, and then an escalation and notification protocol. And what I'm getting at is there is within the company oversight, it's the mechanism of oversight that comes to the board or any subcommittees. And I wanted to understand that linkage and how we fare against other transit agencies or other operations that would be similar to us, perhaps in the business of transportation.
Through the chair, that's exactly right. As you indicated, we have an internal mechanism for reporting, but the way we ensure that the board is informed of all of this information is through the CEO's report, as well as through the Audit Risk Management Committee. So this information is presented to, I mentioned on an annual basis, the information coming out of our annual review is presented on an annual basis to the Audit Risk Management Committee. But on a regular basis, we are informing the board through the CEO report of various key performance indicators and reporting out on those and how we're doing. So that's the mechanism we are using. And in terms of looking at other transit agencies, they follow the same type of protocol in which they inform the board in a similar manner through their equivalent of a CEO report.
Thank you. The second question was just helping me understand the different pieces of legislation or rules around the responsibility of the directors. So I think most people are familiar with Occupational Health and Safety Act and how it applies to employees. Does that also extend over our customers or passengers, be it at the time, and the general public, or does that fall under the criminal negligence provisions? Or is there anything else that I'm missing from those two?
So generally, the Occupational Health and Safety Act is about workers and a safe workplace. And so more likely in the scenario you raised with respect to passengers is in the criminal code, criminal negligence, legal duty of care with respect to ensuring safety of.
Okay, and then when someone is if an employee is in the care and operation of a vehicle, are there other provisions that then apply to that individual that would be separate from the board?
In the individual being the operator?
Correct.
So, yeah, so you would have, on the top of my head, you'd have Highway Traffic Act. So there's provisions there. You see charges for criminal, careless driving, whatever charges depending on the nature of that. It could escalate depending on the charge back into the criminal code, but you'd have, for sure, you have some obligations with respect, again, not necessarily on the operator, but with respect to the maintenance of the vehicle and the vehicle shape rising out of various acts, including the Highway Traffic Act.
Okay.
That's the most obvious.
And I guess the extension of that question would be the HTA, I'm assuming applies to buses that operate on the roads. Does it also apply to streetcars that are running on the road? Does it apply to subway trains or any of the other modes that we've got?
So buses, yes. Streetcars are a little bit of a hybrid. The streetcars are in fact excluded under the HTA and then added for certain provisions of the HTA. So it's a little bit of some provisions apply and some don't. And subway trains are not governed by the Highway Traffic Act.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, would anyone like to speak? Seeing no speakers, can I have a motion to receive their presentation, please? Commissioner Osborne, thank you. All those in favor? Thank you, that carries. All right. That concludes the business of this meeting. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Commissioner Holliday, all those in favor? Thank you. Item carries, we are adjourned. Thanks.